Okay, so now comes the part where we're going to put the diaphragm on. So we're going to remove the two outer pieces, or clamps as it were. So we're going to start about 1.25 inches down from the top. So we're going to mark this here. 1.25 inches down, and that's where we're going to put the top of our diaphragm. So we're going to feed this back through again. And don't forget, in the diaphragm here, you've got 2 layers. And each layer is going to make one side, so what we're doing here is we're lining this up with that top mark, and we're also lining the edge of it up with our pencil mark down the center. And this part you really want to try and get as accurate as possible. Put some clear tape on it, because you got to be able to see when you've got the other side butted right up against it. I'm going to need to cut some more tape here. Scotch tape that was any good, I would use that, because this only has to hold till you get it clamped down, but you want it to hold well enough that it stays in place when you clamp it. So for this purpose, I'm using a little bit of cutting pieces from a roll of shipping tape, because it holds so much better than Scotch tape. And as you can see, I'm even having trouble with that. Which will kind of be the case until you get everything clamped down and it's been in place for a while and it gets set and doesn't have so much springiness. You also don't want to put a bunch of blobs of tape on there if you can avoid it, because you want the other one to go over the top of that. And it's easier if you can feel the edge you're butting up against. I suppose it would probably help if I had pre-cut all these pieces of tape to start with, but I didn't, so sue me. All right. And hopefully, when you get done, if you're really lucky, voice coil ends up being in the center and about vertical, up and down, instead of at an angle. But that's okay if it's off a little bit. That's what the adjustment screws are for. At this point, I think I'm just going to attach this side and clamp it. I don't have to worry about the tape coming loose. And just do exactly the same thing on the other side. Okay, so that's the basic contraption there. And you want to make sure you have free movement of the voice coil. So now is when you adjust it to get the gap as tight as you can, as close as you can without stopping the free movement of the voice coil. Okay, well, that's what you do anyway. I missed recording a little part of this video where I was adjusting the nuts and adjust it. But make sure you got a small gap and some free movement. My gap on here is pretty small. It's I can get it closer too with some additional tuning. Looks like it's about maybe 3 millimeters at this point, and I've got some room to go. It just takes gradual tweaking and getting everything lined up. And this one's a little bit off. Not too bad though from vertical, but yeah. If you get it vertically lined up, it works better. This one isn't perfect, but you can still adjust the top and bottom. And if you do, it'll just be at a little bit of an angle. And if it's at a little bit of an angle, what it usually means is one of these sides need to go up or down just a little bit, one of the two, and pull the whole thing one direction or the other. So you need to tweak it and adjust it to get it operating well. There you go. Alrighty, now here's our finished little beastie. Notice a couple things right down here. I glued in using just hot glue a couple of terminals, which should be attached better, but if I ever get to making a final version, I will. Right here we've got the wings, which actually make very little effect. They do make a slight difference, but very little. My hope was to cancel out some of the stuff coming around the sides, but obviously with a dipole like this, what you actually get is a cardioid pattern, so you get a cancellation at the ends anyway in general. But I was just hoping it would smooth out the frequency response a little bit, but it doesn't make much difference. So other than if you want them, because I think they look good, there's not a whole lot of point to that. However, there's another issue as far as front to back. The fact, and I don't know right now a good way to solve it or exactly what the effect would be on the frequency response. It seems to have a slight bit of the dipole peak, which in my case is being removed by the partially helped by the crossover. But I think that when you get your movement here, you get a front to back from each diaphragm that goes over and partially cancels out part of the frequencies. It'll cancel out higher frequencies as it gets more towards the edge, or potentially increase them. So something that would prevent this front to back error from flowing through this way without increasing the mass of the diaphragm. So in other words, something not attached to here. Maybe a barrier on the inside, but it has to be close enough, and also to be extremely close to keep those small high frequencies from jumping back and forth. I know they're pretty small for 20K. But I think something like that would help, but I haven't thought of a good way to implement it yet. I was thinking of things like gluing a piece of foam on the inside where there's a very thin margin here, but getting it to match the curve exactly and all that is tricky, because no matter how hard you try, you can't make these come out equal, at least not without doing it with a machine. So that's good. So what else do you do now to finish it off? Well, other than putting those on there, that's about it. You notice I adjusted the feet so that they sit at an angle, so that they're mounted on there. And the diaphragm, nothing is glued in, so the diaphragm is still removable, so I can experiment with that. This works pretty good here. I'll throw up some graphs and things to show you what I'm getting and a little more follow-up information about what you're going to need to do if you want to integrate this into your system. You've got a couple of things, because you've got because of the size, the voice coil moves in the magnetic gap here. So lower frequencies cause an extreme extension on this and throws it out of the magnetic gap, and the sound it makes is really obvious as your sound goes away. Instead of a drum beat being a thump, it's sort of the opposite as it moves out of the magnetic gap and loses energy. So you can't use it in this form for really low bass frequencies, so you'll need a crossover of some sort. At the moment I'm running mine with a simple capacitor on it, but I may add a coil. Let me show you some graphs. We'll go from there. Okay, so we've got some graphs here for you to look at from the Rubanoide. So first, I'm going to show you the frequency response, and this is the frequency response without any crossover on it. I cut it off at 100 hertz because anything below that is ridiculous, and I'll show you why. You notice that without any crossover, you get a little bit of a hump here and a dip there, and that's part of what I'm trying to reduce. But we solved that in my case. We put a crossover right about here and cut it down so the frequency response looks a lot better, and I'll show you that in a moment. But you can see this has some sort of output down here almost to 100 hertz, but you don't want to try to use it that low, and I'll show you why. We're going to go right over here and look at the distortion. Okay, this is your signal that the driver's putting out. This down here is the noise floor on this upper part here. So where the line is here, this is 2000 hertz, and you notice there's a big dip there. Okay, and then it goes back up, and you got a little bit of a peak there. Now look what happens after 2000 hertz. What you've got here is the fundamental, okay, or the noise floor. Let me find it here. Let's see, right there. Okay, so this is the noise floor. Okay, so anything lower than that you're not going to hear. However, this little peak, so now we'll highlight the harmonic distortions. This is below the noise floor. This little peak right at 2 kilohertz is slightly above the noise floor, and more to 1 kilohertz. But look what happens down below 1 kilohertz. Spike, 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 and especially that one. That's down at 400 hertz. You know you'll hear that and that one. So these are all audible forms of distortion, and the ones down below 1 kilohertz, 1 kilohertz and up, you won't really hear those forms of distortion, but I don't, because they're just low enough. But it's starting to distort at that point. So that was one of the reasons behind my decision to use it as a crossover at 2500 hertz. And that makes a bit of an improvement. Now let me show you the frequency response with so to do that, I put a capacitor on it. Let's go back to here. And now you can see the frequency response with about an 8 microfarad capacitor on here. So You notice it's still not perfect. It's not perfectly flat. And that's true. Our 20K is out here. I don't know why our graph keeps going to 50K, but 20K is down here. And you don't want to use anything below this point, and it's easier to, I recommend crossing over above that point because you've got a sudden drop off there anyway, and distortion is going to start, so it makes no sense. But this part up here is a good use area. Now, let me show you something else. I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to show you, let's see if I can figure this out here. Too easy to get the screen screwed up and then you're all out of context and don't know what you have now. You can take all these off except for two here now. Show you the two I want to. Alright, so we're going to bring back in this one. And then I want to show you a frequency response of my little metal dome tweeters. Okay. 5 or 4, 6. Yeah, basically the same. What the heck, I like the color of 6 better, so. Okay, so now if you'll notice, this is the frequency response of the Rubanoide in red. And this is the frequency response of my dome tweeters that I didn't like the sound of in green. And you notice they also have a similar drop between 2K and 1K, which is interesting. But the frequency response overall is a little bit smoother, but they sounded way less good. And I'm going to show you why. Let's go over here and look at distortion. Look at distortion on my flatter dome tweeters, which still have to be corrected a little bit with crossover. Look at the distortion here. This is our noise floor as before. There's the noise floor highlight, so you can see that. Look at this big spike here. So this is distortion, you can see there. Let's highlight that. Look at this. Dome tweeters, they're starting to spike there. And this is between 4 and 5K, which is a bad place to have a spike. Then look at this. At 6K, the distortion spikes up all the way to there. And that's like, a 35, 40 decibel spike up from the noise floor, and then it drops off. And that's why my little dome tweeters sounded like dog poo, even though they look kind of flat. So there's another reason why you don't want to just go by just the frequency response. With everything else being equal, flatter frequency response makes it sound better, but in this case, not everything was equal. So with tweeters with a distortion like that in them, it's not going to sound good. Okay. So there's a couple other things I wanted to see here. So you notice my one I made has wings on it. Turns out the wings made almost no difference in response. I'm leaving them on there just because I think they look good and because they do flatten it out just a slight bit. So you notice on the two, the red is the standard and the green is with the wings on. And you notice, the green is with the wings off. The red is with the wings on. And you notice what's happened is this hump here has come down slightly. And this dip here from the green has come up slightly. So putting wings on them improves the frequency response a little bit, but a lot less than I thought it would because of the fact what I mentioned, the fact that it has a cardioid response to start with already, and tends not to reflect energy off the walls to the sides, just to the back and such. So So thank you all for watching my video. I hope that those of you who wanted to make a Rubanoide did so and got some enjoyment out of it, or at least learned some basic principles. Upcoming, I have a ton of projects I want to do, but one of them that I should do following this is a little bit about integrating extra speakers together, a little bit about the crossover and how to do that. And in my video, I'll only approach the most basic aspects of how to get you going, and I'm using just a simple crossover, and the graphs were done from that with a simple capacitive crossover, but I may make it a second order crossover and get some more roll off on that to reduce that little peak a little bit, and that's pretty easy to do by adding a coil to it. And some other aspects about design you might want to consider if you actually want to use this thing as a good sounding speaker, and I think they sound great as tweeters. I used to have some, well, long story. Anyway, thank you, like and subscribe if you like this, and please feel open to ask questions or give me any suggestions, especially suggestions for future videos that you'd like to see, and I'll try and make as many of them happen as I can do. Thank you.